about leadership. And so sometimes people have wondered, where is leadership, right? Leadership comes through the papers. And you'll hear in a minute about sort of my philosophy on these papers, but my aim is not to give you the content for the paper. My aim is to pose a question and allow you to wrestle with it, to derive your own understanding about spiritual formation, which I think is essential to become a leader, and then is essential for leaders to practice with others. And then lay ministry, and if you've tried to do any kind of academic research in lay ministry, you'll find that evangelical Protestants have nothing to say about it. The Catholics talk about it, to a much lesser extent the Lutherans and the Presbyterians do, and the Anglicans. But outside that, there's nothing. I think that highlights a problem. We don't think about lay ministry, which I think is a big mistake. I think it's unbiblical, and I think it's crippling to our churches. So the two papers are intended to provoke thought on your own in those topics, although through the draft workshops there's some cross-pollination as you see each other's thinking. The readings are intended to develop us in our own spiritual formation. They're intended to give us insights to help other people with spiritual formation, and they are themselves tools for spiritual formation with other people. They're really designed to be used in small group settings, churches, things like that. So the reason I use those is that I think they accomplish a bunch of things at once, and they give you, I hope, useful material to use with other people. Even if you never use the books, just the concepts are useful to use in conversation, and I've found that to be true in my work one-on-one with students on campus, that the concepts, the frame that Smith gives us is useful in talking to people. So I am including the leadership discussions in the block session, but that's more just to get our wheels turning. I'm not going to dump a philosophy of leadership on you. Questions about any of that? Okay, let's talk about draft workshops. Any of you have done draft workshops before? No. Okay. This slide is just an overview of what I'm going to talk about here. A couple approaches to writing. Not that one is good and one is bad, just they're different. And my experience is that most of us are more familiar with one approach, and I'm using the other. And I should say, I'll make this PowerPoint available to you, so if you want to take notes on the slides, that might be more useful than trying to copy each slide. Should have done that ahead of time, but the PowerPoint was getting tweaked up to a couple of hours ago, so that would have been slightly impossible. So I'm going to talk about approaches to writing. I'm going to talk about composition itself. This is not an English composition course, but I think talking a little bit about composition may give you some insight into why I'm doing what I'm doing with the draft workshops. I want to present to you an overview of the writing process and show you where draft workshops fit in that. And then I want to end by talking about how the workshops will work tomorrow and how to prepare for those. So please stop me at any point if you have questions about any of that. So the first approach to writing that I want to cover is the one that I think you are more familiar with. And it's what I am calling, not originally, I stole this, writing to demonstrate learning. The writing composition scholar Peter Elbow uses this phrase for this approach. This is the approach that sees the process of writing a paper as being about taking existing knowledge in your head and shaping it into a presentable form that we call a paper, with 1-inch margins, 12-point font, double space, paragraphs, good grammar, all of that stuff, right? So that's what the writing process is about. Under this understanding of writing, the learning takes place before you begin to write. You know stuff, and then you write it. Okay? The purpose of this kind of paper is to demonstrate that you know stuff. So research papers, term papers, these are the kinds of things. It is possible, although it's not always true in this understanding of writing, but it's possible that the papers are graded against a sort of ideal right paper that says the right things. Okay? So this is familiar, right? This looks like other writing assignments you've done. Yes? 3 nods? No? 4 nods? 4 nods and 1 no. Okay, that's fine. If you haven't met this approach, you will. Because the vast majority of academic papers take this approach to writing. This is the approach that I'm using in this course. I use the other approach in other places, but in this course I use this approach. And it's what is sometimes called writing to learn. In this understanding, the process of writing a paper is about constructing knowledge that you did not have before you started writing the paper. Sometimes writers say things like, how the famous quotation ascribed to multiple different writers is, how do I know what I think until I see what I write? And that's writing to learn. That it's when we try to put our ideas into coherent sentences and paragraphs that we begin to see what we really think. And that's a hallmark of writing to learn. In this understanding, the learning takes place during the writing process. It's not that you learn something and then you write a paper about it. It's that as you are writing, you're developing the knowledge. The purpose of this kind of assignment is to promote thinking and learning, not to demonstrate the right answer. I haven't sensed this in our interaction on Brain Honey, but my on-campus students have really been wrestling, not all of them, but some of them, really been wrestling with what answer I'm looking for. You know, when I say, what is spiritual formation and how does it function, they're thinking, I don't know if this is what you want. And I don't know either. If it's a good answer, it's what I want. I mean, if it's got good evidence and good logical support, and it's coherent, then that's what I want. If it's incoherent and it doesn't have good support and it doesn't make any sense, it's not what I want. Right? I
kind of get it there. Like, I had a little bit of problem in that.
Yes, yes.
I don't understand what he's talking about.
Right. And part of the confusion is most people are used to writing to demonstrate learning, and they're saying, he hasn't told us what spiritual formation is, how are we supposed to write about it? And the answer is, right, that's correct. I haven't told you, I'm not going to tell you. Figure it out, right? Because I'm interested in a good argument, right? By which I mean supported, right? You make a claim, you bring in evidence, you explain the evidence. That's what I'm looking for, not whether or not I agree with it. I learned a good lesson in my very first English class in college. It was an in-class essay with a teacher that I later learned was about the toughest grader in the entire English department. And 2 of us got high grades on the paper. And as he passed back the papers, he told us that the highest grade was whatever it was. And I get mine back and I got one of those grades. I'm feeling good about myself. And I read his note and he says, I do not underline, agree with you, but you made a good argument. Yeah. Right. That forever shaped my way of thinking about writing. And most of the time, I don't give assignments where I'm looking for a specific answer. There are exceptions. When I teach statistics, I'm looking for right answers. I mean, either the number is right or the number is not right. But in something like this, I'm looking for your thinking more than I'm looking for your conclusions. I'm interested in the thought process, in the way you support your ideas. I mean, if I disagree, I'll probably tell you so. But that's separate from whether or not it's a good paper. So, as I said here, a writing to learn assignment is going to be based on the thought and the argument quality, whether or not it responds to the assignment well, not what you said. And I've just spent 2 class periods workshopping papers with my on-campus class. And they're all over the map, right? They're going in all different directions, and that's great. That's wonderful. There's similarities, but people are raising different issues, different concepts. They're approaching the concept of spiritual formation differently. They're dividing it differently, and that's all good. I'm going to stop and ask if there are questions about this approach to writing, because this may be new for some of us. I want to sort of re-emphasize. It's not that one approach is good, one approach is bad. They're just different and they have different purposes. For the topics in this class, I think this approach is important because of the lack of information on these topics in our religious circles. The fact that there isn't a body of research literature on lay ministry shows that we have not thought about it very much. Therefore, I'm not interested in you're reading one or two articles that do exist or hearing me talk about it and just that's it. We don't need to funnel the information down like in a typical research paper. You find a gazillion sources and you funnel it down to the ones you're going to use. We've got the opposite problem. There are no sources. We need to open up and expand and begin to develop thoughts and theories about these topics. And for that, this approach is the way to go. It's divergent rather than convergent. Okay, let's talk about composition a little bit. Good question, I think, is why do we call writing composing or composition? And I think that the best insight comes from looking at the roots of those words, and that prefix, the con, means with or together. And the heart of the word, the pos part, means to place. And so composition means placing something with something else. Okay? I think that's helpful because that sounds far more mechanical than we usually think about writing. I think most of us usually think about writing as something that's inspired. I'm getting a couple of nods. I used to teach English composition, and students would tell me, I sat and stared at the computer screen for 3 hours, and I couldn't get anything. Right? And what they're saying is, I was waiting for the muse to come and inspire me and flow through my fingers. And the secret is, if you wait until you're inspired to write, you're never going to write squat. Because that's not what writing is about. Writing is not a frenzy of inspired production. It's placing one thing with one other thing, and one other thing, and one other thing. Now, that said, composition is a musical term. So I want to ask you, how is writing like art? Good, what else?
I mean, I guess you could look at it, writing, when you write poetry, poetry is like an art because of what you're saying. It's your words are your art, and how you take those words and form them into sentences and the topic that you're talking about, and whether you have passion for that topic that you're talking about or not, what you're writing, how you compose it is art.
So I heard you say the words you choose, your word choice, and your sentences, the way you put those words together, right? Now, isn't it true, though, that the rules of grammar require you to make sentences in a certain way?
Yes.
So where does choice come in then?
I mean, you don't... Okay, with grammar, if you're going to be grammatically correct, yes, you have to form your sentences into a certain way to be grammatically correct. But if you just choose to write as if you're writing to a friend or if you're writing to a particular person, then you're going to word your sentences the way you want to.
Right. So, yeah, good. There's an infinite number of grammatically correct sentences, actually. And if you don't think that's true, here's the way that you can prove that. Take any sentence and just add to it, he said. Right. Now add to that, he said that. He said. Whatever you're reading. And you can do it. It's called recursive. Grammar is infinitely recursive. You can always keep adding more on, which means that there is an infinite number of possible grammatical sentences. They may not be very interesting, many of them, but they're out there, right? Beyond that, we can write grammatical sentences that are sort of mind-blowing in their content. And one of the best examples of that is the beginning of a little poem by E. E. Cummings. Anybody know E. E. Cummings? Yeah. This is This is probably his most famous poem, and it starts out, anyone lived in a pretty how town, with up so floating many bells down. And then it goes on like that. Right? He danced as didn't, he sang as did. It's perfectly grammatical. But what does it mean to say, up so floating many bells down? Well, kind of hard to figure out. It's grammatical, though. It's grammatical, right? So, yeah, the way sentence structure is called syntax. So syntax involves artistic choices. Word choice, diction involves artistic choices. What else about writing is artistic? I'm not looking for any right answer. I'm divergent again.
Music has an effect.
Yeah.
So if there's no effect from what you've said, then what was the point?
Good. So this
there
is,
must be an effect from what you are saying or writing.
and this is the difference I would argue between like a shopping list
Yes.
and writing that's intended to move you,
Yeah.
right? Although a poet would quibble with that, right? Because poets like to quibble with things. So is this making sense that there's an art to writing?
Mm-hmm.
We make choices that have artistic effects.
Mm-hmm.
I would add, along with the idea of music moving us emotionally, words have that same effect, right? We can talk about cacophonic words, words that are harsh and grating in their sounds. Euphonic words, words that sound good. Syntax, sentences, have pleasing rhythms or dry, boring rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things come into play in writing. And so there is an art to writing. Some people find it easier than others, but everyone can learn the art just as everyone can learn to play a musical instrument.